Building APIs is one of the most common tasks that you're going to do in the modern web development world. And what we're going to do in this series is we're going to look at the most popular Django package for building APIs, and it's a package called Django REST Framework. Now, we've covered individual videos on REST Framework on this channel in the past, but this is going to be a start to finish series where we go over all of the most important concepts from the package. So we're going to introduce REST Framework from the ground up, and we're going to build an API throughout the course of the series. Now, this API is going to be centered around products and orders, and we're going to show all of the CRUD operations that you can perform with REST Framework to create and update and delete products, and also to view and get lists of products and individual products over the API. Now, I've got the documentation for REST Framework open here, and if we look at the API guide here, what we're going to do in this series is cover all of these most important concepts, such as the REST Framework request and response objects. We're going to look at all of the different views and generic views that are provided by Django REST Framework, as well as view sets. And don't worry if you don't know what some of these are, we're going to touch upon all of these concepts in later videos. We're going to cover serializers in the next video, and that's a core concept to Django REST Framework. We're also going to look later on at things such as validators and, of course, authentication and permissions. We're going to cover different authentication scenarios with REST Framework in the duration of this series. And we're also going to look at caching and throttling, as well as filtering, pagination, and some of the other concepts that you see here, including some testing scenarios as well. So we're going to cover a lot of things in this series, but we're going to start from the ground up. And in this video, we're going to start by building the models for this API and for this application. So remember, products and orders, they're the core models in the application. And we're also going to have order items. Now I'm going to quickly look at this diagram that I've created using the graph models command in Django. And that's provided by the Django-extensions package. So we have here the 4 key models that we're going to use in this series. We've got a product model, and that contains these fields here. Let me zoom in here so we can see this better. And we also have an order model, and products are linked to orders through this table at the top here, and that's the order item table. So the order item is like a junction table between the product and the order models, and that allows one product to have many different orders associated with it. And of course, when you order items online, you often order more than one product. So this is a many-to-many relationship that we're going to build, and the order item table is going to be that junction table. And of course, as well as the order, we are going to tie that to a user, and that's going to be done through a foreign key, and that's going to be this user field on the order model. So we're going to build these models in this video. So what I'm going to do just now is go back to the documentation. Before we get started, I just want to touch upon a few other things. We're not going to build any kind of client in this video. We're not going to build a React or a Vue.js application or anything like that. So this is just going to be an API that we build, and we're going to show how to interact with that API using tools such as the REST client on VS Code. And just by focusing on the API and not using any kind of client technologies, we're going to keep it focused on Django REST Framework itself. So I just wanted to mention that before we get started. Now in the description, we've got a link to a GitHub repository for this course, and it contains the starter code in this folder. Now as we add videos, I'm going to add a folder for each video, but the starter code is what you want to clone to get started with this project. Now I've already cloned that, so I'm going to open VS Code, and what I've done is I've copied that code into a video1 directory that I'll push to GitHub after the video is released. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some of the utilities in this starter code. Now, what we have in the directory here, if we go back to GitHub, is we have the starter code directory, and that contains, among other things, a requirements.txt file, and we have the requirements for this project. Now, I'm using these versions, but you might want to update them if you're watching this later on. But we've got Django, and we've also got Django-extensions and Django REST Framework. And one of the models that we're going to build has an image field, so we're going to use 𝗏𝗨 as well in this series. Now let's go back here, and the other thing I want to look at in the API directory, that contains our Django files such as models.py and views.py. And we also have a management command here called populate database. Now this is some code I prepared in advance. We're going to run this command after we create the models in this application, and it's going to populate the database with a user object as well as some products and also some orders and order items. And those are the key models that we're going to build in this video for the rest of the series. So what I'm going to do is go back to VS Code, and we're going to go to models.py, and what I'm going to do is build these models now. So let's get started with that. Now before we go on, if you want to support the channel, we have a Ko-fi page linked in the description, and you can support the channel through that mechanism in order to keep these videos free and on YouTube. And if you're enjoying this content and you want to see more of this series, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. Now I've cloned the project and we've got VS Code open just now. So I've created a Python virtual environment. So if you want to do that, you can run python-m and you can invoke the venv module. And the name is venv-drf. So that's how you can create the environment. And then you can install the requirements from the starter code with pip install-r and then requirements.txt. Now I've already installed these, but that's the command that you need to run in order to install Django REST Framework, and the other packages in the requirements. Now once you've got the virtual environment and once you've installed the requirements, you can start building these models. So what I'm going to do to start with is create a custom user model, and you can see at the top from the starter code we've got abstract user in the imports. We're going to extend that and we're going to define our own user model for this series. And I'm not actually going to add any custom fields at the moment. We're just going to pass for now. But if we do need to add fields later on, we can very easily do that now that we've extended the abstract user. Now let's start with the product model in terms of the other models in this project. That's going to be a Django model, so it's going to inherit from models.model. And what I'm going to do while I'm building these is minimize the sidebar and let me make the code a little bit bigger here so we can see this. Now the products are going to have a name, and that's going to be a models.char field. And I'm going to give them a max length of 200 characters. We're also going to have a description for this model, so that's going to be a models.text field. And that's similar to a char field, but it doesn't have that limit on the number of characters. You can have as many characters as you want when you use a text field. And what that maps to in the underlying database doesn't have any kind of limitation on the number of characters. We also are going to define a price for the product, and that's going to be a models.decimal field. With a decimal field, you need to provide two parameters, two arguments, and that's the max digits, and we're going to set that to 10 digits in the decimal field. And you also need to specify the number of digits after the decimal, and we're going to give 2 here for that value. So basically a decimal, a price decimal here, can have 10 digits in the number, and we're allocating 2 of those to what's after the decimal point. So that's the decimal field, and we're also going to create a couple of extra fields here. So I've got a stock field here, and that's going to represent how much of the product is in stock in this imaginary store that we have. And let's set that to a positive integer field. Now I want to add one more field here, and that's the image field. And that's going to be a models.image field. So the product that we have on our system might have an image, and we're going to upload that to a directory called /products. And this upload to parameter is going to tell Django that when an image is associated with a product, the image itself is going to be stored in a directory under the media directory, and this directory is going to be called products. We've done a video on this and on media files in Django. That should be appearing on the screen now if you've not seen that. We're also going to allow this to be null. So what I'm going to set here is blank equals true and also null equals true. Now a few other things I want to add to the product model is I want to add a property, and this is going to determine if the product is in stock. So let's call this property in stock, and because it's a property, it's going to be a function in Python. And what we want to return here is a Boolean value. So we're going to check if self.stock is greater than 0. If that's true, this will return true and the item is going to be in stock. Otherwise, if self.stock is equal to 0, this value here is going to be false. So that's the property I want to add, and I also want to add a dunder string method as well. And the dunder string method is just going to return the name of the product, and that's self.name. So we now have this product model, and the product has the name, the description, it has a price, and it has a value for the number in stock, as well as an optional image field. Let's now move on to the order model. So I'm going to create a new class just below here, a new Django model called order. And again, we'll inherit from models.model. Now to start with here, I want to define a text choices class. So we want the order to be associated with some different statuses. For example, the order might be pending, it might be confirmed, or it might be cancelled. And there are other statuses in a real system that you might want to add as well. So let's create a status choices class, and that's going to inherit from models.text choices in Django, which is a fairly new addition to Django. I think it was version 3 or 4 that they added that. And this functions similarly to an enum, so you can define some values here, such as the different choices that you have for the order. So we've got a choice of pending, and the choice could also be confirmed, for example, if the order has been delivered. And the final status we're going to add is cancelled. So we have 3 choices associated with an order. Let's now add the fields to the model that are going to map to the underlying columns in the database. So first of all, I'm going to create an order ID, and that's going to be a models.uuid field. And we're going to set this to be the primary key for this particular table. So primary key, we're going to set that to true. The order ID is going to be a universally unique identifier, so we can set that as the primary key. And we're going to set a default value here. So when a new order is added, it's going to assign a default value of a UUID here. We can set that to something from the UUID module in Python, and that's the UUID4 function. So at the top here, we need to import the UUID module. So I'm going to do that right at the top. That's coming from Python's standard library. So import UUID, and then we can use the UUID4 function as the default. So when an order is created and we don't specify an order ID explicitly, it's going to use this function here to generate that order ID. And that's going to be the primary key for the order model. Now an order should be associated with a user, so we're also going to set a foreign key here, and that's going to be to the user model. And when the user model is deleted, let's just cascade that delete and remove all of their orders from the system. Now you might not want to do that in a real application, because if a user disables their account, you might have some reporting or financial purposes where you don't actually want to remove their orders from the database. But I'm just going to keep it simple for now, and we're going to cascade that delete in this series. Now commonly when an order is created in a system, you want to track when that was created. So we're going to add a created@, field here, and that's going to be a models.datetime field. And we can set auto now add to true here. And what that's going to do is basically assign a default value of the current timestamp when the order is created and saved to the database. And finally, we created these status choices here. So we're going to add a status field now, and that's going to be a models.char field. And we can give it a max length of, let's say, 10 characters, because I don't think any of these values up here go beyond 10 characters. Now, in order to associate the statuses with these choices, what we're going to do is we're going to add a choices keyword argument. And we're going to set that to status choices.choices. And I'm going to split this into new lines just so that we can see this better. What we've got here is a status choices class, and that has a choices attribute or a field. And that splits the choices into a format that's understood by Django's models. And I want to add one final value here, and that's a default. Now we added a default for the UUID, but when an order is created, it's common to default that to the pending status. So what we're going to do is refer to status choices here, and it's the .pending field on the text choices class. Now I'm going to go down here and I'm going to add a dunderstring method. So we have an order model, and the stringified representation of that model is just going to be order, and then we're going to add the order ID to the string, and we're also going to add a reference to the user who has actually placed that order. So that's going to be what the string version of the order model looks like. So this order model has some choices, and it has a UUID field, which is going to serve as the primary key for the model, and a foreign key to the user field. Let's now move on, and there's one more model that we're going to add here, and that's going to link the order and the product. And that's going to be called order item, and that's going to inherit from Django's models.model class. Now we're going to define that in a second. I just want to pass for now, but what I've forgotten to do is associate the order with some products here in the model. So what we're going to do is add a products field here, and that's going to be a many-to-many field in Django, and it's going to link the order with the product model. Now we're going to set a through model here, and we're going to set that equal to this model that we're creating below called order item. So let's set the through model here. And we can also set a related name here. So when we're querying from the product and we want to get all of the orders associated with that product, we can set related name here of orders. Now we'll see examples of using this related name and using this many-to-many relationship later in the series. If you want to know more about the many-to-many field in Django and about how to define a through model and the related name parameter, you can check out the video we did on that previously as part of the Django ORM series. So now that we've linked the product and the order through this many-to-many field, we can go down to the through model, which is order item. And what we're going to do here is add the foreign keys to each of the parent models. So an order item is going to be linked to an order. That's going to be a foreign key to the order model. And again, let's add an onDelete parameter here. So when the order is deleted, we want to cascade that delete and remove all of the order items. Now we also need to link the order item to the product. So we're going to set a product field here, and that's also going to be a foreign key to the product model. And I'm going to copy the onDelete parameter here and just paste that in here. Now the reason we've created a through model is because we want to add extra information to the order item. We don't just want the foreign key to order and product. If that was the case, we wouldn't actually need the through model. We could just use the many-to-many field. But what I want to do is add one extra piece of information here, and that's the quantity of the given product for this order. So we're going to add a quantity field here, and that's again going to be a positive integer field, and that's going to capture the quantity of the given product in the given order. And we can also add a property here based on these fields. So I'm going to add a property that I'm going to call item subtotal. And that's going to be a property. It's going to take self as a parameter. So basically the subtotal is going to look at the product, and it's going to look at the price of that product, and it's going to multiply that price by the quantity. So what we're going to return here is self.product.price, and we're going to multiply that by self.quantity. So this is another example of how you can use properties in Django model classes to take pieces of information on the model and the relations, and then calculate some data such as the subtotal in this case by taking the price and multiplying it by the quantity. And the final thing I want to add here to the models is a _string method. So it's just going to be a string representation of the order item. It's going to look at the quantity and the product's name, and it's also going to look at the order ID. So that's the models that we have here, and let's add an empty new line at the end. What we're going to do now is we're going to actually create the database that we're going to use in this series. So I'm going to bring back the sidebar, and you can see on the left hand side we have a database.sqlite file. I'm going to open that database in a VS Code extension called SQLite Explorer. Now if we look at the database, we don't actually have any tables at the moment, as you can see. But what we're going to do on the command line is we're going to run a command here to generate the migrations for this application and for the models that we've just created. Now we can do that with Python manage.py, and it's the make migrations command. And actually I'm getting an error here, and the reason for that is because we've added a custom user model, but we need to go to settings.py, and I'm going to go to settings.py right at the bottom, and we're going to add a link to that user model. So you can do that in Django if you override the default model with the auth user model setting. And we're going to set that to the model that we have, and that's the user model within the API application. So in order to do that, we can specify api.user. So we're linking up Django's settings to our custom user model. We're telling Django that this is the user model that we want to use in this application. And you can do that with the auth user model setting. Now, once we've done that, we can clear the terminal, and I'm going to run make migrations again. And you can see that it's now created a migration file called 0001 initial.py, and we've created these models. Now what we can do in order to apply the migrations is we can run python manage.py migrate, and that's going to create these tables in the SQLite database. Now you can see before we didn't have any tables, but if we refresh the database, you can see we now have different tables appearing in this database. Now we're going to look at some of these. For example, the API user table. That represents our user model that we've got in this application. We have our table for the order item and the order, as well as the product. So all of those models that we just created, we have a table now in the database for those, and we're going to store data in those tables. Now what I've got in the starter code, if you remember from the start of the video, is we have a management command called populate database. Now what we've got in that code base is we've got the import of all of our new models, and I think I've imported the user model from both the Django auth package as well as from our own models file. So we only need it from the models file, and then we're going to run this script called populate database, and it's going to create a bunch of products in the system for different products we might want to be selling in our online store. And we're also going to create some orders just randomly, and that's going to be 3 orders here. So order.objects.create, we're going to tie the order to the user that we created in this script, and then we're going to iterate over the products, and we're going to randomly sample 2 products and create an order item for those 2 products that is linked to the order and the product. Now you can have a look at the code in this script in greater detail if you'd like, but what I'm going to do just now is go to the command line, and we can clear what's here at the moment. And in order to run the custom management command, we just run python manage.py again, and this time we specify the name of the script that we want to run, and it's populate db. So when we run that, you can see that it's processing at the moment, and when it's finished, we get back to the command line here. And what I'm going to do, just to make sure it's worked, is I'm going to go back to our database.sqlite file, and if we open that in SQLite Explorer, let's have a look, for example, at the user table. If we show that table and we look at the contents of that table, let me just fix the screen here. You can see we now have a user that's been created here. And I'm going to look at the order table, and you can see we now also have some orders, and you can see the UUID that's been created. That's the primary key for the order model, if you remember from our models file. and all of these orders have a status of pending, and they're all linked to the same user with the ID of 1. And if we look at the product table here, let's show that table, and you can see we now have some products, and the product has a name and it has a description here, as you can see, and that's just some random lorem ipsum text. And finally, each product has a price and it has a value, a number in stock, and currently all products do not have an image, so that's null for all of these products. So that's the tables that we've created, and we now have some data that we're going to work with. And that's important because we're going to show at the beginning of this series how to actually get data over the API using Django REST Framework and return that to the client that's making the request. So we now have products, we now have orders, we can actually do that in our API, and that's going to be coming up next. Now what I want to do just to finish the video is show you how I generated this entity relation diagram using Django. There is a video that we did on the graph models command that should be appearing on the screen now, but basically this is a command that's provided by Django-extensions. It's the graph models command, and that allows you to basically generate a dot file for the models in the given application that you pass here. So I'm going to pass the API application, and I'm going to redirect the output to a file called models.dot. So models.dot, that's going to send the output from the graph models command into this file here. And as you can see, this is generated by Django-extensions. You can then copy this code that's been generated, and you can go to the 𝗏𝗏𝗃 online website and basically just paste that in here, and it's going to generate your ER diagram. So that's very useful to know about. Check out the video that we did on this command if you want to know more. But that's just a basic extension to the video. We now have the models in the application. In the next video, what we're going to do is move on to serializers. Now, serializers are a very important core concept in Django REST Framework. They allow you to go between Django models and query sets and JSON data. And of course, when you get requests coming into your API, you often return JSON data. So you want to convert the database entities, the models and the query sets of models, into JSON data in order to return that response. We're going to see how we can use serializers to generate that JSON in the next video. Now that's all for this video. It's very much been a setup video, but we're now ready to get started diving into Django REST Framework and the concepts we mentioned at the start. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.